Yes, sir. What's your name?
Matt,
Matt, go ahead, sir.
I had heard you explain on other talks something to the effect of at least a reason we know the universe isn't infinite is because if it was infinite, we would never actually get to this point.
Yeah.
So I guess in a similar way, if God is outside of time and he is infinite, how can he choose to create? Because doesn't that imply a point either before that there was no universe or a point of the creation, which implies time?
This video is a cut from one of Dr. Frank Turek's presentations, where he explores life's biggest questions. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament reliable? In this session, recorded live during the Q&A portion, a student asks, if the universe cannot have an infinite past, how can God? Dr. Turek dives into this profound question, touching on insights from science, philosophy, and theology to explain God's eternal nature and his relationship to time. Let's see how Dr. Turek tackles this fascinating topic.
Well, this is a point that William Lane Craig has dealt a lot with in his books and on his website, reasonablefaith.org. So he would say that as God creates the universe, he creates time. And of course, that's what Einstein found as well, that once the universe was created, that space, matter, and time, or I should say space, matter, and time are correlative. Space, time, and matter are correlative. They came into existence together. You can't have one without the other. So space-time is a fabric, so to speak. Now, Craig has written on this, and I'm not sure where I would fall on this, but I think that there are theories about how this could happen. How could God be eternal and then make a choice to create the space-time continuum? Obviously, he has the power to do so, but is there a sequence in God's thoughts? Is there a time beyond time, so to speak? And that we're speculating when we say that, so we're not sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Exploring God, time, and creation.
The intersection of theology and science invites us to wrestle with profound questions about God's nature, his relationship to time, and the act of creation. These are not only intellectually stimulating, but also spiritually enriching inquiries that can deepen our understanding of the Creator. What does it mean for God to exist outside of time? When Christians say God exists outside of time, they affirm that God is eternal and unbound by the linear progression of past, present, and future. Psalm 90:2 proclaims, "Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." This means God's existence is not contingent on the universe or the flow of time. He transcends it entirely. Unlike humans, whose existence is confined to a timeline, God's eternal nature allows him to see all of history simultaneously. He is the author, not a participant of time's progression. If time began with the universe, how can humans understand before creation? This question challenges our ability to conceptualize timelessness. Since time began with the universe, speaking of a before creation involves human language struggling to describe a reality beyond our experience. We think in temporal terms because that's how our world functions. However, God's timelessness doesn't mean he existed in a static void before creation. Instead, he exists in a mode of being that is fundamentally different from ours. Just as a painter exists independently of the canvas he paints, God's existence isn't dependent on the framework of time. Einstein's space-time and God creating time. Einstein's theory that space, time, and matter are correlative, one cannot exist without the others, provides a fascinating lens for understanding Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God's creation of the universe includes the creation of time itself, as time is woven into the fabric of the physical universe. This scientific insight underscores the Christian claim that God is the first cause. He brought space, time and matter into existence simultaneously. Einstein's discoveries don't diminish theological truths, but rather harmonize with them, providing a framework to marvel at God's power and ingenuity. What is time beyond time? The idea of time beyond time is speculative, but it attempts to address how God's eternal nature interacts with creation. Some theologians, like William Lane Craig, suggest God existed in a timeless state prior to creation, but entered a temporal mode when he created the universe. Others maintain God's eternal state doesn't require him to experience time in any sequence, even after creation. While this is fascinating to ponder, Scripture reminds us that the secret things belong to God. Deuteronomy 29:29. We cannot fully comprehend how eternity functions, but we trust God's revelation of himself as the unchanging and eternal creator. At first glance, it may seem that God's decision to create the universe implies a sequence of thoughts or actions, but this conflicts with the biblical understanding of God as unchanging, Malachi 3:6. God's ability to create doesn't necessitate change within himself. Theologians resolve this by emphasizing God's omniscience. God's decision to create wasn't a new thought, but an eternal intention. From our perspective, creation appears to mark a beginning, but for God, it is the outworking of his eternal plan. Can we trust our interpretations of God's eternal nature? While we can't fully grasp God's eternal nature, we can trust what he has revealed. The Bible provides a clear foundation for understanding his transcendence and immanence. Although human logic has its limits, the truths God has made known to us, his love, justice, and creativity, are sufficient to trust his character and his purposes. Does God's existence reinforce the idea of a personal God? Absolutely. God's decision to create the universe was not out of necessity, but out of love and relationship. The God of the Bible is not an abstract force. He is personal and relational, desiring connection with his creation. His eternal nature magnifies his ability to care for us, knowing the beginning and end of our lives. Philosophers like William Lane Craig integrate science and logic to make Christianity accessible in an age that values empirical evidence. This doesn't replace faith, but complements it, showing how belief in God aligns with reason and observation. Faith is not blind. It is supported by the cumulative evidence of creation, history, and revelation. There is no fundamental conflict when both are properly understood. Science explores the mechanisms of the universe, while theology reveals its ultimate purpose and source. The tension arises when science oversteps its bounds to make metaphysical claims, or when theology dismisses scientific discoveries. Both disciplines, when rightly applied, point to the grandeur of God. Understanding God's relationship to time stretches our minds and invites us to trust him. The Bible declares that he is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, Revelation 22:13. While we may not grasp every detail, we can rest in the assurance that God's eternal nature means he is in control, unchanging, and trustworthy.
For those seeking to dive deeper, resources like William Lane Craig's Reasonable Faith provide rich exploration of these topics. But at the heart of these discussions lies a simple truth. God's eternal nature calls us to awe and trust. Let this be an invitation to lean into his greatness and find peace in his unchanging love.